Monday Newswire. We are kicking off. There's a lot in the news. Alex and I, producer Alex, say hi, Alex.
Hello, hello, hello.
We're just talking about high school football. It is here in the state of Washington. Games just start this week. Most of the other places in the country, they've been going for 1 or 2 weeks already. And we were just laughing. He was sharing about how he wanted to go to games. And what did your wife say to this?
So context, I do not have kids in high school. My kids are 3 and 1. Yes. And I love high school. I love football, but high school football is so much fun. And I told my wife, I said, we should start going to the local high school games, support, and, it's fun. And she looked at me like I was insane.
Yes. Well, here's the caveat that I wanted to enter in. Growing up in Ohio's one of the biggest football states in the country. Yeah. Besides Texas. I mean, we'll give it to Texas. Ohio was probably close second, Pennsylvania, like those schools. And that's what you do Friday night throughout the state. That's what you do. Yeah. And West Coast, no. Like even here, like we have really good high school football. We have some, top tier athletes. And I will be blown away if there is 1,000 people at like the biggest game. So this weekend, my son's team plays. They play the number 8 team in the state. They're a team in a lower division that is, a team to watch right outside the top 10. It'll probably be one of the top games in the league this year. And I'm going to be, I don't know how many people are there. It's a brand new high school. It's pretty well attended, but I know it won't be more than 1,500 people. And what's so funny is there's a gentleman that I got to know here in the last few weeks, moved to Spokane from Tulsa. And their main rivalry game, they would have 45,000 at games. Holy and it's just, it's a different world. So we're talking about that.
You actually have sons that are playing varsity football at these schools where me, my wife's like, wait, let's hold on here.
I get it. I can understand, but I mean, it is a different world. It is someone who grew up outside of that, especially in California. Yeah. It's like, are you stupid? Like no one goes to football games. And that's not cool.
Yeah,
so,
it was. We haven't done it yet, but maybe I'll watch your son's game if it's going to be broadcast. I'll watch that and I'll put it on the big screen.
There you go.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
All right. Well, Alex, today I'm excited about this conversation. We'll see where it goes, but we were talking and getting ready for this session and our live on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, comment, share with us. I'd love to know, are you going to go watch football games this weekend? But the piece that we're going to talk about, can you trust the media? I'll kind of give that salacious headline. Can you trust the media today, period? So we're going to dig into that. I'd love to know what you came up with and found out in your research.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking last night, right? We were sharing back and forth, a couple different articles, some historical, just kind of going over, this history of trying to create unbiased media. And, if you kind of go back here, there was in 1947 till about 1987, the Fairness Doctrine. Has anyone ever heard of this? The Fairness Doctrine? Anyone listening? Tyler, did you hear about this before we started kind of researching? I did not know of this.
And so I knew about it because Simon Sinek in his book, Leaders Eat Last, wrote about it. And he wrote about the change in like information. So he wrote about and documented the fact that, once, and he points towards this, is when Reagan changed it and allowed a unbiased, disallowed with the requirement for unbiased. It was all based upon revenue. Mm-hmm. So at that point, a lot of TV stations were struggling because they couldn't sell advertisements for those news segments. And so it was really based upon the financial driver of a lot of these news stations having the capability to sell advertisements on TV. That was the main driver. And Simon Sinek writes about that in his book, Leaders Eat Last. So that's where I knew about and understood that there was a change in that period.
Yeah. And basically, they wanted to keep the media unbiased, right? So that,
it was a public service.
Yeah, it was a public service. And then I think it was like, there's another article that you look into about Rush Limbaugh I think it's like late 80s into the early and through the mid 90s, who I remember growing up as a kid because my dad would listen to him on the radio, like a lot of people who changed the game up a lot too, because in the 80s, I think revenue was down. A lot of ad revenue was down in the media landscape because it was, fair and mostly being just told from a both sides perspective. And then Rush comes by and he has, a very opinionated, starch, more conservative leaning side. And the numbers are like astronomical. And he just changes the whole media landscape. And this article goes on to write about, what he did and how he changed that, atmosphere, media presence as this big voice with a loud voice and a big opinion and, money, it all comes down to money.
I mean, that's the thing. So we're talking about this today and, with the current background, obviously, of the election coming up, we have the recent interview with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz on CNN. You can do you feel like that was unbiased or was it biased? Was it, one of the things that I read is that Dana Bush, CNN, reached out to Trump and Vance and said, hey, do you want to do an interview? I don't know what's happened there. The difficulty is, as we are in our age right now, it's funny, yesterday we're driving my wife, my daughter and I, and she's almost 18. She'll be 18 in a month. And we start getting into this conversation. And it was just kind of like this idea of what's going on and can you believe any of it? Because it's just so like polarizing. And as we discussed this in part. And that's what brought on this idea that today could be a very viable topic is we're in a place where it's like, no, you can't believe any of it. You can't believe any of it because it is all driven by the dollar. And even, we have recently with Mark Zuckerberg coming out and how pressured he was during the last several years to censor, to, position different things on Facebook, what you could allow, not allow on Facebook based upon, pressure from the government.
Right.
And he came out just recently with this big letter and it's just like, oh, like this is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have Elon Musk right now, who's kind of in a little bit of a fight with the Brazilian president based upon, what they're allowing on X, and that X is pretty much shut down in Brazil because Elon's like, I'm not going to censor stuff. I believe we're based in the US. All right, fine there, but I'm not going to play that game.
Well, that was, Elon's whole point of buying Twitter, right, and changing it to X was, at least what he says is it's not about the money for him, but preserving, freedom of speech and allowing people who have difference of opinion to, say, what they want and however they want to say it. Which, I think that's very important, right? People are going to have difference of opinion and different philosophies and thoughts, and mainstream media, you could see it, it's just extremely polarizing in one direction or the other. And, I was going on in my research, just kind of what do people trust the most when it comes to mainstream media? And the two most trusted, networks are the Weather Channel, which I thought was funny. It's sure, we all need to look at the weather. And then BBC was number 2, which isn't even an American news organization. They're British.
Yeah.
And then
I know people that routinely they get actual news from Sky News. So Sky News is British, European based. And I remember this when we traveled through Europe and internationally, and you would get a completely different slant. I had a friend this summer during the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. He was in Greece. Right. And I was asking him, hey, what are they saying there? And his opinion is oh my goodness, what are these Americans doing? This is a hot mess. And that was based upon the Europeans, the people that were there. And, it's such a different perspective of what we have domestically from internationally that we can't even comprehend it because we are so enveloped into this is what you'll think and this is how you think it. And it's all driven by dollars. Who has the money to create the ads that look like posts, that look like real stories? I don't have this on our stuff. I know this was brought up that many of the, especially coming into the start of Kamala's, campaign, that they were creating a lot of news articles that were really just ads.
Yeah,
they were sponsored advertisements that were made to look like news articles, so they had momentum. So there were stories, because there hadn't been many, that they started pumping them. The campaign was sponsoring a lot of these stories, and they were really just sponsored ads.
And reading, kind of going down this list. I mean, and the other thing too is when you're trying to doing the research around most trusted media sources, then you got to go to who's the data collector? Because I'm looking down this list, and a lot of left-wing media companies are more trusted. And then you go to the bottom of this list, it's like everything right-wing is the most distrusted. Yeah. So then you're like, well, how are they collecting this data, right? And it's just, as we get closer and closer to this election, in my family, Tyler, we spoke about this before. I'm the middle person. My parents are more right. My brother and his family more left. And, there's the texts come through of like, hey, read this thing. And then, my mom's like, you can't let, communists take over. And my brother's like, don't focus on this. Let's focus on, loving each other. And like, don't.
Well, hold on. I want to pause right there.
Go.
People not listening, but understanding the perspective of your parents.
Right.
Your parents immigrated to the U.S. when they were very young, right?
Grandparents, they're first
grandparents. Okay, so your parents were both born here, but they experienced that coming from the Eastern Bloc into the U.S. That was very much ingrained in them, what it's like to lose or not have freedom.
Correct. Yeah. Oh, yeah. My grandparents went through World War II and lost everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, that's where this idea of historic cleansing, getting rid of the past and forgetting about, what it looks like to have such this change in, socialistic and communistic things that happened in the 30s, really the teens through the 30s into the 40s in Europe. If we forget about how a lot of those doctrines came about and how a lot of it came about, we'll repeat the same thing. At some point in history, it will be repeated.
And yeah, no, you bring up a good point, because I understand, when my parents send something, they're in their middle 60s, 64, 65. And so they've experienced and have a whole different perspective of, the U.S. and the evolution of the country and where things have gone. My brother and I, I'm late 30s. We're 2 years apart. I'm 37. He's 39. And so we have less of that experience. My brother's traveled the world, but he has like a very particular viewpoint. But I respect, when my parents say a certain thing about whether it's socialism or communism or taxing, high tax rate, right? We're seeing this really high tax rate,
especially from New Jersey, man.
Right. And it's like, I respect and I understand where my parents are coming from. And then my brother is more like avoidance, right? It is what it is. And my mom's like, no, you shouldn't just avoid it and be a bypasser. You should know and understand what these groups are trying to do instead of just avoid it and avoid that confrontation.
This was, I want to, try to keep somewhat organized here, but my wife, as we were talking to my daughter, again, my daughter can vote this year. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I don't know if she will. I hope she does. But it's not something I'm pressuring her into, because even yesterday having the conversation was like a first, and it was very healthy. It was very good. And my daughter brought up the having a conversation with a friend, and she goes, I don't understand how like older adults, they can't have conversations. It becomes so like venomous, like vile and venomous. And she was talking about having a conversation with a friend of hers, and he had a completely different view than her, but they were able to have a conversation, and it was about women's rights, and it was about abortion, and it was about those things. And she goes, there's so much gray area there. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. And from a sexual abuse to a medical, whatever, I'm not, my opinion there is every situation is uniquely different. That's my opinion based upon, that's how I view a lot of things. I remember my father-in-law, he asked me, first time I ever met him, and I was jacked. I was like 205, 5'11", like 4 or 5% body fat, like lean and like jacked as a 20-couple-year-old. And I don't know how this came up at dinner. He goes, well, what do you think about steroids? And I'm like, well, there's a time and place for everything. And it was just kind of, and that's how I view a lot of it. There's a time and place for everything. It's very hard on some of those very gray area items to like an edict. It's all or nothing. All right.
Right.
So I'm listening to my wife and daughter. They're talking about this. And one of the things my wife says, she goes, be very careful getting hung up on one thing and forsaking everything else. Mm-hmm. And it was great, in this conversation that we were having, because again, you have to largely kind of accept a lot of stuff you don't like in order to get in and to have policy that does affect your life. She goes, well, I get so, and this is my daughter, my wife is 42 years old. She's done what she's done. She's accomplished a lot of things in life. She goes, I have never been in a situation where I feel like my rights have been oppressed. That was her words. She goes, I never feel that way. So the whole conversation about women's rights, I don't get upset about, because I understand I get to control so much of the narrative.
Right.
This is a woman who's built a multi-million-dollar business, has no college education because she went into work and just was that driver, got an apartment at 17 because she went and got a car without any credit because she wanted to, and just, there was no. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the context here is, if we allow it to be a barrier, then we forget about everything else. Instead of, all right, I got to look at the whole situation. And again, coming back to the difficulty is, where do you get that information to see the whole situation? Where do you get it?
And that's the thing. I for me, and I know for a lot of people, we try to source information and knowledge and educate ourselves through multiple media platforms, right? I try to look at the CNNs and even MSNBC and Fox News, and what are they talking about? What are the headlines? I just like that. And then I go to YouTube, right, and see who's talking about what through YouTube, and then you can search all the different articles
about a major dichotomy. So I mean, that's a similar practice myself. I have a couple news things that I get subscribed to, whatever. If there's a guy who provides some daily headlines out of Texas, and I appreciate it because it's a little different, but it's also very unbiased. And then we'll go to kind of Apple News. That's where I kind of filter it. Google News, all right. And then I'll go to YouTube, and it's unbelievable the disparity.
Yeah,
unbelievable. Now, granted, I know YouTube is very much based upon, the things that you're engaged in, what you follow, everything else. But when you take it as a whole, it's shocking.
It is shocking. And it's like, I don't take anything where it's like, this is the whole truth and nothing but the whole truth, so help me God, right? I really try to look at it out of a lens of, okay, who is this person? What are they trying to say? Are they obviously, who are their brand? They have brand deals, like even on YouTube, right? People are getting paid a lot of money for these shows now. Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, everyone else that's on, has big Spotify shows or Sirius XM radio. We're talking tens of millions, if not over $100 million in business that these shows have. So I take everything with a grain of salt. I hear their perspectives. But like you said, at the end of the day, I have to feed my family. I have to pay my bills. I got to wake up in the morning and tie my shoes and do my thing. And I can't let all these different forces or factors really affect me, because if I get hung up so much on the wall and on immigration, how am I going to be able to perform at a high level that day? I can have an opinion about it and thoughts that surround what should be done around that issue. But for me to just go out there and, yell about it every day, and that's kind of what it feels like. It's like, let's talk about that same issue over and over again to get people stirred up and angry.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back and give a little bit more context, because this is hitting me. So we talk about the fairness doctrine. The fairness doctrine was brought into place by, it was a U.S. communications policy in 1949, and it was then kind of repealed in 1987. However, it was never written into law until 2011. Yeah. So that's where this major change was, that, really between 87 and 11, is a lot of different news agencies, aka Britannica, the encyclopedia, whatever, said that, no one really challenged the fairness doctrine, meaning they kept things pretty unbiased. And then in 2011, with Obama, in his first term, they got rid of it in total. And they got rid of it in total. And much of this, reading the history, was they felt that the conservatives had a bigger voice than the liberals. And so they were like, we're going to go into this full tilt. And it's pretty amazing here 13 years later, that the current fight is that it's where is this gone? Yeah. And really, if you look at the slant of most media, and I would, even go, like you mentioned this, you shared this, is how partisan are it. I want to pull this up real quick because I'm going to count the numbers here, because I think it's pretty substantial. If you look at a chart, we'll make sure we throw it in the notes. Trying to find it here, Alex. I don't know.
Yeah. What's the exact point you're looking for?
As far as the ones that are most trusted, which is okay. Right, I got it.
Yeah.
And when we look here, 52 news sources is what it shared, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There are 18 that are viewed as heavily leaning to untrustworthy, and most of those would be considered right wing. So you have the Daily Beast, Fox News Channel, Newsmax, Huffington Post, the Washington Examiner, People, Fox News, Breitbart, InfoWars. Those things are heavily untrusting. And then you look at the collective news that are the more trusting. You talked about the Weather Channel, the BBC, and a lot of these are more, I would say, liberal leaning. New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, NPR, The Economist, Newsweek, The Guardian, Bloomberg, who have been Politico,
LA Times,
are collectively known as being more liberal, left-leaning.
Yeah.
And yet, in this basis, they're more trusted, because when you look at our society, we're overwhelmingly, the tables have turned in the last 13 years. And I think that's where, I'm not trying to say right, left, just be down the middle of the road and let us all have a discussion, and not have these salacious headlines that vary dramatically. Same author, and the headline is so salacious, and you would think that, Trump was actually dead in one, and the other one, it's like he just lied and jumped on the ground just to sell a story. It's like, nope, the truth is in the middle.
Well, Jillian Michaels is?
Yeah.
Jillian Michaels lived in California for a very long time.
The weight loss.
Weight loss expert, nutritionist. Whoa. Is that your
hey. She didn't like that.
Jillian Michaels, like,
I mean, I didn't know. I mean, Honey's all upset.
Honey's Tyler's dog. Now, I was going to say puppy, but that dog is not a puppy anymore.
She's 10 months old now.
How much does she weigh?
She's probably getting close to 90.
Wow. 85. That's crazy. But so Jillian Michaels, just observer of your environment. She's been in California a very long time. She's seen what's happened in Los Angeles. If you go to LA and you live there, from the 90s, the early 2000s, and see how much that city has changed in a downward spiral with homelessness and what downtown has become, how expensive things are. I mean, everything. It's just, it hasn't gotten better. And she left. And she is a liberal left-wing, from her voting record. And she's talked about, I'm just going with what I see, not what this network's telling me to do or that network, but I'm just observing, and because I care about the safety of my family, and I want, and it's very expensive, and someone who's very successful, but she saw what she saw and she left and went to a different state. And it's like more of like, we just need more people of like, Stop listening to what other people are trying to tell you and just be an observer of your reality and your environment and ask yourself, is it better than what it was? And if it's not, then that is the truth, and at least to that degree of where you are. And that's what she saw, and she left. Does that make her a right-wing Republican? No. She's just like, no, it's not as good as it was.
What I think has happened with her, she's gotten very much canceled.
Yeah, because of that stance.
Because of just being willing to state the obvious.
Right.
I mean, it comes back to, everything that was said and shared during the COVID pandemic that has turned out to be completely false. Like the number of, there's an entire list of those things. And I mean, it probably took fire for someone that was willing to just say, hey, I don't agree with the masses.
Right.
To be shunned and shut down and say, to use a biblical term, away with you, Satan. Jesus said that when, in the context of one of the parables he was teaching, is just away with you, Satan, get behind me. And it became very much that type of approach during that period. That is like, if you wanted to stand up and have an opinion other than, complete, I would say, shut down and bow down at the altar of the government. If you wanted to say, this doesn't make sense to me, then you were told you were a bad human.
Right.
And we've seen all of that play out to say, oh, no, actually, you were fed a line of BS to be controlled.
Right.
It is what it is. That's been shown to be true. And it's difficult because here we are today, as we finish up and kind of put a bow on this, as we just, where do we go? How do we do this and come to an election period in where we're at in government and saying, all right, how can we actually talk to people civilly?
Right.
To be able to say, oh, okay, well, that's a different opinion than I have. I think I just shared this with you.
Yeah.
I was talking to a family member, and there was something that they had on a poster in front of their house. I was there at their house, and I said, hey, where does that come from? And the first comment, well, if you don't know, I can't tell you. I was like, I wouldn't be asking if I didn't know. And, the conversation actually got quite heated. And I'm like, I'm just asking. There's no opinion attached to it. And I'm like, just where does that come from? Right. Help me understand, because I don't see any of this. I haven't heard any of this. I don't pay attention every day. And essentially what this person shared, much of what you're sharing, is that there's so many sources that are left and there's very few that are right, that means the left must be right, because there's more sources there that are left. And I come back to this conversation. It's like, well, I think it's a lot driven based upon money and, what's happened over the last 12 to 14 years with that change. And it really starting to show, well, instead of being in the middle, it was really taken out of context. It's really not that big a deal, but people want to make it a big deal. It's like, well, I'm going to make it a big deal if it helps me prove my point.
Yeah. Will it change? How will it change? I mean, it's the grand question. I don't know. And kind of just going back to, moving from California to Florida, obviously we're two different, states in terms of its, where they lean from a political standpoint. You get bundled up into when I moved here, everyone's like, don't bring your politics. And I'm like, you don't even get to know me. Like, I want you to get to know me a little bit and just assume I'm this person, which, from a, Republican right-wing perspective, if you watch some of these places and that's all you watch, you just bundle a whole group of people into that demographic where that's not true. And that goes for both sides.
But why is that being said though?
Because I guess wherever they're getting their information, right, their media is telling them that if people coming from this state and they're coming to your state, they might bring what's happened in Los Angeles and San Francisco, increased in prices and everything, crime rates are up, homelessness, that will then come to their state in Florida. That is the.
So what do you think has driven that opinion?
the right-wing news organizations that are feeding them that information, and which I'm not saying it's wrong, but
there's a basis there.
Right.
For example, Austin has been more of a liberal city in the state of Texas. Correct. And with the influx very much the last 10 to 15 years of people from different areas, that has been wildly considered the city that does not fit in Texas.
And the real estate is crumbling right now. There.
Exactly, because I think you have those cities. You have cities. I think of Nashville's another one that's kind of addressed some of that. It's kind of like, all right, well, no, we're this Mid-South. We have a totally, pretty encompassing. It's like, that's fine. You want to come here for the quality of life, but accept the quality of life is based upon some of the very conservative policies we have. And so when people get into government and they start to bring, I want to leave California because it's expensive, but man, I want to have all of the, political policies that they have. And I'm going to try hard wherever I move to incorporate those policies. Yeah. That's where that pushback comes. Is just,
I get it. Yeah.
Be here, but don't bring that here. And having experienced some of that living in the West, and understanding very much community we live in. We moved here. It was very much a conservative, it was different than the other side of the state. Whereas, Spokane is to the east, right beside Idaho, pretty conservative. That's no longer the case at all.
Right.
None. It is completely changed in the 15 years that we've been here. So very much understand that, hey, all right, you want to move here. That's fine. But don't bring I'll share one last example to this.
Yeah, do it.
Having lived in California, my wife growing up in California, we talk about the difference of, high school football and just that totally different world, those things. When I moved to California, I didn't understand it. Maybe you saw this too. It was very common. I would get home from work, or we would get home from doing something, and we would drive into our neighborhood, and it was a brand new neighborhood when we moved there. And so it was people from all over, whatever, drive into our neighborhood. We would drive up to our house. We'd open up the garage door. We'd drive it in the garage. We'd shut the garage door. We'd go in our house. That was normal. That's what people did. People did not hang out outside. Our kids were really, really little there. So we didn't play with them in the cul-de-sac. We lived in a cul-de-sac, but it was very much that culture of, you don't interact with people in your neighborhood. You interact with people you want to because you go to their house. It's not this open, free, hey, I'm a new neighbor. Let me bring you cookies. Do you need a cup of sugar? That was foreign in California. Whereas for me in Ohio, that was normal. And so it's interesting, being in Washington now the 15 years. And at first time we moved here, and we're going to Home Depot. This is 2009. We go to Home Depot and we buy some stuff. I don't know, I think it was blinds for our house. And the lady asked, how are you guys doing? Are you having a nice day? And we walk out, and Kelly's like, why was she so nice? Dead serious. Yeah. That was the conversation, because it was so foreign to her. And now I look at our community and our society now, and it's very normal for people to live in that sheltered, sealed off. I go into my house. I don't engage. I don't interact with my neighbors at all. It's become much of that in this society, that people are now trying to go to communities that aren't like that.
Yeah.
In this area.
I've had a similar experience growing up in New Jersey in the suburbs. I was out all the time. Doors were never locked. Garages were open. We were out playing. That was my life. It was great. Moving to California, then I went to Texas. I lived in Texas for 4 years. Kind of had people are really nice. Go out of their way to be nice. We were fun and great in New Jersey. That was cool. But this is over the top. I'm it feels almost inauthentic because they're so nice. Then living in Manhattan, more hustle and bustle. I wouldn't say people, for me, it wasn't people were mean. It's just New York's fast, man. If you haven't been there, they got shit to do. They're going. Then going to California and living in Los Angeles, it's this more mellow vibe, but very elitist. It felt like you said, if you're in the neighborhood, you're in the gate's closed, you're in the garage, you're not coming over. And if you knock on my door, it's who the hell's at my door? unless we had a play date or an event to attend. It just felt
you don't go knock on your neighbor's door.
No.
Unless you're invited, you don't do it. Like, and you may listen to this and you think we are crazy, but that is the culture. Is you don't go up to your neighbor's house and knock on their door to see if they're home. You know, like our kids wouldn't go knock on our neighbor's house to say, "Hey, can Johnny come out and play?"
Right.
That doesn't happen.
No. And you know, and I tell Ashley this, my wife, just like the feeling, and it really is a feeling, like the family nucleus is really important to me, and I want it to be in an area where family is really important. You know, if you can, like a less divorce rate. I do think having friends that, you know, where that's less does affect, you know, how a kid grows up. And I just looked at LA as like not the strongest place to raise a family with strong family values and teach his own, right? You and dude, LA's beautiful. Like the mountains, the beaches, all the things and the food. Yeah. I love that about Los Angeles. But for me, when it came to those things and those factors, it was a 0, right? If we were to scale 10, it was very, very low. And so we went down in South Orange County where things were a little better.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, you know, we're talking about stereotypes, and it's not absolute. Like I know people live in communities that are absolutely embracing it. And again, it's a stereotype, but it happens. And you coming back to it is this idea of, you know, what do we want out of life? What are you looking for life? And you can't have it all because there is no utopia. It's really what can you give and change, and how can you have either that quality of life that we're looking for. And I think that's really this challenge we're in. And as we wrap up, as we try to put a bow on this session today, I have this thought and idea. The best way for us to understand better what's really going on is to be willing to have conversations with people and not get offended and not try to offend. And when we can get there and we can peel away whatever media is trying to tell us, and we can start comparing notes, it's kind of like, you know, whether it's playing a game or, you know, everyone, hey, go out and do your own research and then come back in. We're all going to compare notes, and none of us is going to have the complete picture of the puzzle. But when we share it all, we can understand, well, this person said that. Well, they said something completely different 2 days before. Well, you know, I have it on record of them saying, you know, XYZ, where they said ABC. It's like, well, what did they really say?
Right.
Oh, we don't know what they said because they said both of it. Well, like, what's the truth?
What?
Like, and that's every candidate, not just, you know, one or the other. That's both of them if we're looking at presidential right now. And it's kind of like, all right, who's the more consistent over time then, I guess?
I mean, to kind of wrap things up. I mean, it is leadership, right? People who are in leadership positions need to be more like Daryl Davis. Do you know the story of Daryl Davis?
No.
Black man who basically befriended the leader of like a Ku Klux Klan.
Oh, okay.
member.
Yeah, totally. I know.
And changed so many of these members. And he was just willing to listen and talk to them.
Yeah.
And understand why they thought a certain way. And it's like, so if those listening, Daryl Davis, Google search this guy, incredible story.
Yeah.
Like
he befriended the grandmaster, like the highest high of the KKK.
And like followed him around and like trying to like, and they
became like dear friends.
They became dear friends. And like, eventually the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, like said, I was wrong. Like he was like, he turned him. Daryl Davis turned him to be, and it was just that reaching out of the hand and like listening. And I think we just need more people who are open to listening and not like this venomous fight against one another and just wanting to be loud and heard, and just kind of, we just need more of that. And I think as if, you know, people who are leading in these leaders in these positions can just think like that and understand, and not just try to be like, I need to be heard. My voice needs to be powerful from the mountaintops, and listen a little bit more and understand. You know, I think we can.
It's not the person with the loudest microphone, the loudspeaker that is right. It's the person that, you know, it sorts through and with wisdom and discernment and the ability to do so. And Yeah, it's an interesting world we live in. Obviously, the context today is sharing some of the history about the fairness doctrine, when that changed, how it's created it such a strange world we live in today. Some understanding of the reality is like you can't trust any of them because they're all driven by the dollar, and they're all driven by a dollar that is going to drive attention to their financial strength, to their institution. That to me is the bottom line of today. Is there is none that are unbiased. They're all biased to their own bias, which is the money.
It's true.
So,
it's true. Yeah.
Cool. Good conversation. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching either live on LinkedIn or the recording on YouTube. Glad to be here with you. Monday Newswire on Tuesday. Hope you enjoyed your Labor Day. We'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.